Hello everyone, Salam, Namaste, Adab, and welcome to today's event. We are going to hear the word of Rahi Masoom Raza, a very well-known figure, especially for Algerians. Nonetheless, entire India knew once Mahabharata started coming. So we are going to hear from Professor Bodh Prakash, a very well-known professor of English. This used to be at Ambedkar University. And before that, he used to be in Delhi College also. A formal introduction will be given by Dr. Meenakshi Shivaram, who is former faculty Department of English Literature at Mumbai University, Chennai University, and University of Bangalore, Christ University of Bangalore. Concluding remarks will be given by our own Professor Asif Siddiqui, Professor and Chairman, Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. So welcome you all, and let's hear Dr. Meenakshi Shivaram for the formal introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you first for having me on the platform. And while I thank the forum for having me over here, my special thanks also to Professor Bodh Prakash for, he was the one who's introduced me to all of you here. The reason I think I am over here is because I was fortunate to get the opportunity to translate this novel by Dr. Raza. It's called Topi Shukla. It was translated like this into English. And again, very fortunate that this novel this translation won the Sahitya Akademi Award for translation. But I'm sure that the award went to the story, right? Not to the translation per se. The story itself was so powerful that it got recommended for the award. It is my pleasure to introduce both the writer and Professor Bodh Prakash in some detail. The writer very briefly, because I can see that the audience is extremely familiar both with Aligarh Muslim University and with the writer and with Hindi and Urdu literature. So it is interesting that when we read literature, to look at it from a framework of four variables. There is the world, this world of history and events and places and people. There is the writer who belongs to this world and views this world, is aware of this world in a very sensitive way, in a very troubled way, not in a flippant way, but he's aware of what is happening in the world. And it is from this sensitive writer that a text emerges. In this case, we have Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza, the writer, and we have all his wonderful novels, screenplays, the entire personality that emerges from him. I mean, to just think that you like a movie like Millie so much, and then you say, okay, who's the dialogue writer, who's the screenplay by? And that's Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza. Extremely popular Mahabharata in a Hindu majority country, and the dialogues written by a Muslim writer, Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza again. So what a complex and beautiful and composite personality Dr. Raza is. And so you have the world, you have the writer, you have the story, and the fourth variable is the reader. That's us. That's you and me. There was a set of readers who received him in the 60s. Dr. Raza is very openly political, openly ideological. He's not like, I would even say not like Salman Rushdie, who would use indirect ways of approaching a political statement, because he was very direct. He was very on your face. And he was one of those very few people who, in his personal life, wrote a petition against the emergency. He's extremely involved in the politics of his day and his times. Writing in the 60s was writing about a post-partition India, which had consolidated some of the memories of partition. And then the loss and the pain and the message of hope, even in novels which end in despair, this great message of hope that peace is possible. He's almost like this idealist, right, who says peace is possible. He said it then. The book was received by the readers of his time extremely a valuable kind of readership that accepted his position on on concepts and ideas that could have fragmented the country then. His own pain in seeing that questions in Topi Shukla especially, where is it possible for a Hindu and a Muslim to be friends? Will society allow for that to happen? And then despite the tragic ending, a kind of an appeal to the reader that it is so possible. Why can you not be sensitive to human emotions, right? So there was that reception of his work. And then so many years after the book has been published, received, and regarded very highly, we move to our times where nothing has changed. You know, the world has changed and it has not changed. Aligarh Muslim University is in the news even today, right? In yesterday's newspaper. So Aligarh Muslim University and its problems and its position as a minority institution is there. The identity of Muslims and the connection between Hindus and Muslims in our society still so openly, brutally right there in our faces for us to contend with these issues. We look at the writer, you know, the relevance of such a writer in our times today. These are minds which are telling us to go beyond a certain way in which we have lived or in which we receive experiences of the world. And so it's interesting to ask questions like, what would Raza have written today? You know, if Raza were a young Muslim. Today, no one is a Muslim. Today, people are an Indian Muslim, right? We've changed from being a Muslim to an Indian Muslim. So if he were a young Indian Muslim, what is the novels that he would write? Maybe the same themes, but would he write it the way in which he wrote it in the 60s? Would he have the courage? Of course, any writer would have the courage. Would he be received in the same way? When his books, his novels were published in the 60s, the books were not banned, which is a big thing. You know, a writer with such a bold statements that he's made about societies, the plural societies and the problems of such societies. I also wonder sometimes if Raza were not Indian, but if he were a Palestinian today, how would he write? Where is the world today? What is the world that we are living in? These are interesting questions to ask as we look at the four variables, because the world has changed in certain ways. Writers are part of this world. They cannot jump out of their worlds and their societies. We as readers receive them from our own limited perspectives. And here is someone, an apostle of peace, saying peace is possible, give peace a chance. Are we ready for that at all? So interesting questions and absolutely interesting writer to have the talk today on. And who better than Professor Bodh Prakash to talk about it? Because I will introduce him to you a little more in some detail, because Professor Bodh Prakash is at this moment working on a Routledge series. It's called a Writer in Context series, and the writer he's working on is Rahi Masoom Raza. So the entire gamut of this person, his personality, everything that he does, right? It will be there in this book, and we're looking forward to that book. So he's really the right person to be speaking about Raza today. He has been, as was just indicated earlier, former professor of English from the School of Letters at Ambedkar University, Delhi. He has studied at the University of Delhi and Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been visiting professor at the University of Strasbourg, France, and a long room hub fellow at Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. He has worked extensively on the literature of partition. One of his important works is titled Writing Partition, Ideology and Aesthetics in Hindi and Urdu Literature. He has co-edited a reader, which is called Cultural Diversity, Linguistic Plurality, and Literary Traditions in India for the Department of English, University of Delhi. He has published essays on issues related to resettlement of refugees in the peripheries of Delhi and urbanization in the wake of partition. He's interested in issues pertaining to linguistic plurality, caste, gender, violence in partition narratives, and has contributed papers on the same. That's our speaker for today, and I invite Professor Bodh Prakash to talk to us about this amazing writer, Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Meenakshi, for your kind words. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to all our uh, uh, colleagues, friends from India, and good morning to those of you in the United States. Uh, One of the advantages of talking about Rahi Masoom Raza is that he makes your job pretty simple. Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, you are. I think that was just an interruption. Please carry on.
Okay, sorry. So, as I was saying, one of the advantages of talking about Rahi Masoom Raza is that he was not only a creative writer, but he was also a critical theorist. He was an intellectual, and a lot of what he wrote also theorized about, what he thought about the world, his perspectives on communalism, his perspectives on, as Meenakshi just said, relationships between Hindus and Muslims, on nationalism, on identity, on culture, and even more importantly, on the issue of language. So, when one speaks about Rahi Masoom Raza, all one has to do is to sort of quote him. And your job becomes very simple because he was very, very clear in what he said. And as Vinakshi said, he was very bold, he was very outspoken, he did not pull any punches in whatever he said. So, with those words, I would like to begin. But just one more qualification before I begin. The very little of Rai's work has been translated into English. In fact, there are just three novels. One is Adha Gaon, the other Topi Shukla, which she mentioned, and the third one is Scene 75 or Scene 75. Uh, so when I will quote Rahi, I will be quoting from the original, and I will try to sort of give you a rough translation. I'm not a great translator myself, but I will try to give you a rough translation. The original, I've always felt, is so much more powerful, with due apologies to Minakshi and all other translators. But let me therefore begin with three short uh, poems of his, uh, which some of you may be familiar with. The first one is Fasle Ruswai O Shahadat. This was something that he wrote in 1982. हुसैन मैं भी हूं इस जमाने की करबला में फरात के तिश तिश नलब किनारों को अपनी सैराबी की कहानी सुना रहा हूं खबर करो आफताब शर्मिंदा को कि मक्तल बे सर बरहाना वजू किए अपने ही लहू से नमाज असर जदीद पढ़ने मैं जा रहा हूं मेरे जमाने के सारे शिमरो यजीद आए और अपनी अपनी सनाएं लाएं उन्हीं सनाओं पर हम शहीदों के सर उठेंगे कि आज मैं सर बुलंदियों की कहानियां फिर सुना रहा हूं खबर करो सारी जनाबों सारे आबिदों सारे अकबरों सारे असगरों को कि फसल रसवाई और शहादत फिर आई है uh, this is loosely can be translated as the season of humiliation and martyrdom. And in this poem, he is locating himself in the Karbala of the present day. He says, I'm going to tell you the story of my Karbala, in which he's recalling all the images from the battlefield at Karbala, and he says, I shall offer a new namaz and let all the Yazids bring all their swords, because we martyrs will raise our heads to them. And he says, inform all the Zainabs and all the devout ones, all the Ali Akbars and all the Asgars, because now the season of humiliation and martyrdom has come again. So, in a sense, relating his own age uh, to what happened in Karbala many years ago. The second poem, which some of you may be more familiar with, is a poem called Ganga or Mahadev. मेरा नाम मुसलमानों जैसा है, मुझे कत्ल करो और मेरे घर में आग लगा दो। मेरे उस कमरे को लूटो जिसमें मेरी मेरी बयाजें जाग रही हैं, और मैं जिसमें तुलसी की रामायण से सरगोशी करके कालिदास के मेघदूत से यह कहता हूं, मेरा भी एक संदेशा है। मेरा नाम मुसलमानों जैसा है, मुझे कत्ल करो और मेरे घर में आग लगा दो, लेकिन मेरी रग रग में गंगा का पानी दौड़ रहा है। मेरे लहू से चुल्लू भरकर महादेव के मुंह पर फेंको और उस जोगी से यह कह दो, महादेव अब इस गंगा को वापस ले लो। यह जलील तुर्कों के बदन में गाढ़ा गर्म लहू बन बनकर दौड़ रही है। So Ganga or Mahadev says, my name is like a Muslim name, and so you can burn my house, you can murder me. But the room in which I whisper to Tulsi's Ramayana and I tell Kalidas's Begdut that I also have a message. And my message is that the waters of the Ganga, they run in every vein of mine. You take some blood of mine, throw it at Mahadev's face, and tell him to take back the Ganga, because it is now running as the warm blood in the bodies of wild Turks. And the third poem I would like to quote from a very short extract from a much longer poem called Vasiyat. This is uh, this is just the last part of it. मेरा फन मर गया यारों, मैं नीला पड़ गया यारों, मुझे ले जाकर गाजीपुर में गंगा की गोद में सुला देना, वो मेरी माँ है, वह मेरे बदन का जहर पी लेगी। मगर शायद वतन से दूर मौत आए तो मेरी ये वसीयत है, अगर उस शहर में छोटी सी एक नदी भी बहती हो तो मुझको उसकी गोदी में सुलाकर उससे यह कह दो कि यह गंगा का बेटा आज तेरे ही हवाले है। वो नदी भी मेरी माँ, मेरी गंगा की तरह मेरे बदन का जहर पी लेगी। So roughly what this means is that, he says, when I die, put me to sleep in the lap of the Ganga in Gazipur, where he came from, and he says she is my mother and she will suck the poison from my body. But in case I die away from my homeland, and if a small river flows in that town where I die, then lay me in its lap and tell that river that the son of Ganga is now in your care, because that river too, like my mother, my Ganga, will suck the poison from my body. In some senses, I think these three poems that I have uh, just uh, just read aloud, they represent the essence of Rahi's uh, perspective on his own age, on the world that he lived in, and his commitments, his views, his very strong feelings about what he felt. So this is part of an ongoing work on a volume, as Minakshi said, on Rahi Masoom Raza for the Routledge series, work Writer in Context. This series has already brought out volumes on Krishna Sopti, Amrita Pritam, Fanishwaranath Renu, and many others, which are already available. Uh, Fresh translations in English of Rahi's works and some of the original translations of his primary works have been commissioned. They've already been done. As I said earlier, only Adha Gaon, Topi Shukla, and Scene 75, these are the only novels that have been translated. So please bear with me if I quote from the original text. As I said, I'll try to give some rough translations of the same. Rahi is actually better known for his script and dialogues of the TV serial Mahabharat. That's how many of us, at least I grew up watching the Mahabharat during the late 80s. And he's, of course, also known as the author of one of the most outstanding Hindi novels of the 20th century, Adha Gaon. But quite apart from these two contributions, he was actually a prolific writer, poet, critic, and columnist who wrote 11 novels. He wrote an epic poem, 1857, a Krantikatha, several collections of poetry, including, among others, Ajnabi Sheher, Ajnabi Raste, Meg Feri Wala, Shishe Ke Makam Wale, and Garib Sheher, which was published posthumously, apart from writing scripts and dialogues for over 300 Hindi films. Now, Rahi is best introduced as an Urdu Hindi writer, and Urdu Hindi with a hyphen in between. And this is a rarity in modern India. To term Rahi a Muslim writer who wrote in Hindi Urdu might seem rather incongruous, because the communal divide between Hindus and Muslims that had been birthed during the 19th century with the patronage of the colonial state and stoked by chauvinists on both sides has created a popular perception of Hindi being the language of Hindus and Urdu that of Muslims. From a hybrid language referred to as Hindi, Hindavi, Hindui, which was written in two scripts, the Nagari and the Perso-Arabic, there emerged two streams identified as Hindi and Urdu, with their separate scripts for a host of reasons, both literary and extra literary. And these have been extensively researched by various scholars, Christopher King, Vasudha Dalmia, Amrit Rai, Salil Mishra, etc. I will not be going into this, but it is possible to argue that in the 20th century, not all Hindi writers were Hindus, or that not all Urdu writers were Muslims. But it is equally true that after the partition in 1947, instances of Muslim writers who wrote in Hindi have been somewhat limited. Rahi belongs to this rare group that includes Shani, Badiuzzama, Asghar Wajahat, and Abdul Bismillah. But even within this group, what sets Rahi apart is that he wrote poetry in Urdu and novels in Hindi, which is a rarity in modern Indian literature. Premchand, remember, wrote in both languages, but he was not a poet. But this special aspect of Rahi needs an important qualifier. By writing in Hindi or suggesting that Hindi and Urdu were not two but one language, or that Urdu should adopt the Nagari script, Rahi was neither betraying Urdu or Muslims, nor was he trying to endear himself to communal Hindus. Abdul Bismillah, who was his contemporary, he makes a very perceptive comment in an interview with Chandradev Yadav on this particular issue. When asked why only Muslim writers have to prove their patriotism and commitment to inclusive civilization, Badiuzama says, quote, not just writers. A situation has been created such that even an ordinary Muslim has to prove his loyalty to the country. One can understand a positive affirmation of proving one's patriotism, love for the country to which one belongs. But the negative aspect of this is dangerous. That is, in order to prove my patriotism, one Muslim opposes another co religionist. Such Muslims have been lauded and praised as those who, in spite of being Muslims, are bringing to light the weaknesses of Muslims. This kind of thinking has affected mostly Muslims who worked in the intellectual sphere. About Rahi, it was said that despite being a Muslim, he was writing in Hindi. But this is not a praise. Rahi's writing in Hindi, and this is unquote from there. Rahi's writing in Hindi was the consequence of several factors and conjunctures. But endearing himself to a communal lobby was certainly not one of them. He vehemently and steadfastly and bravely attacked the communal leadership on both sides during the 1980s. So we must be very careful when we talk about Rahi as a Hindi writer or as a Hindi Urdu writer. And we must be careful when we are looking at some of the statements that he made with regard to both languages. I will go into some detail on the language question a little later. Rai was born in 1927 in a prosperous family from Gangwali in district Ghazipur. His father was a pretty well-known lawyer, uh, and his brother, uh, Professor Munis Raza, uh, they were sort of very much a part of the progressive movement. Munis Raza Sahab was, I think, a member of the CPI also. And there was a time when the political affiliations within the family led to some sort of a dispute because the CPI had had a candidate in Ghazipur, a man called Pabbar Ram. Rai's father was, he was a member of the Congress party, and he was standing for election himself. Rahi told his father very clearly that he would not be supporting him, and this led to a lot of uh, problems within the family. But Rahi stuck to his guns, and interestingly, Pabbaram did win the elections. That was Rahi from a very young age. His education was interrupted on I think two occasions because he contracted TB, and some of it was done at home. And when he finally recovered, he comes to Aligarh Muslim University, where he does his PhD thesis uh, uh, on Tilisme Hushruba, the influence of Indian civilization on Tilisme Hushruba. Uh, he was very keen. He was appointed to teach in the Urdu department at Aligarh Muslim University, uh, but he was unfortunately not absorbed within the department for a variety of reasons, which were, of course, none of them were academic reasons. It is at this time that his first marriage broke up, and it was a mutual separation. He then decided to get married to Nair Jahan, who was a divorcee. Aligarh circles did not quite appreciate perhaps this particular decision of Rahi, uh, and so he was actually not given the job in the Urdu department, and he was very disappointed, very unhappy. He also had nothing to do beyond that, and therefore he was advised to leave and try his hand in Bombay. In the film industry, you remember this was a time when a lot of Urdu poets made their way to Bombay, now Mumbai, of course. And he followed that route and he left Aligarh for Bombay around 1966. Interestingly, the year that Aadha Gaon was published. Now, I must of course tell you that there is an earlier phase before this where Rahi produces and publishes a lot of his poetry. So he's already a poet by the time he leaves Aligarh. He's well respected. He has published his Urdu poetry. The story about Aadha Gaon is a little more complicated and more interesting. I'll just come to it in a while. But Aadha Gaon, uh, uh, was criticized because of its profanities, and perhaps this was the reason why he was not given the Sahitya Academy Award. At least this is what some scholars have surmised. The incentive to write the Mahabharata, this is again an interesting story by itself. When B.R. Chopra approached Rahi, requesting him to write the script and dialogues for this so-called Hindu serial, Rahi initially turned him down, saying that he was too busy and he could not do it. But B.R. Chopra was not one to sort of back down. He actually called the press and announced that Rahi Masoom Raza was going to write the script and dialogues for this television serial. And immediately, of course, there was, this was the 80s, so you didn't have the internet, but there was a lot of hate mail which this generated from many quarters. How could a Muslim possibly write, the Mahabharata? I mean, the Mahabharata is, a Hindu, a so-called Hindu text. And Chopra then took all this hate mail to Rahi and said, Rahi Saab, here you are, this is what people are saying. And Rahi, being Rahi, of course, said, "Oh, is that so? Then don't worry, I will write it. I will write it." And he spent several months doing his research. He read the various versions of the Mahabharata in different languages, including Persian, Urdu, Sanskrit, Hindi, various languages, and he had made notes which went into almost 8,000 pages of notes. So a lot of very intensive research went into his work when he wrote the Mahabharata. His contribution towards creating a kind of quasi-Sanskritized Hindi which could be easily understood. It never appealed to the purists and the literati, but I think it became very popular through the serial. One more interesting aspect of from his life before I get on to the more formal part of it was an incident which occurred, which had to do with his daughter-in-law Parvati Khan. His stepson, that is his stepson Nadeem Khan, uh, also associated with the film industry, uh, called him and told him that he was interested in marrying a West Indian, a Hindu girl of West Indian origin, and sort of asked him for permission. Rai reportedly said, "Please go ahead. You have my blessings, but I have only one condition." And what is that condition? That you will not convert her to Islam. Parvati Khan, as she was known, uh, she was associated with one of the television serials which was being shown on Doordarshan during the 80s. And it so happened that the Director General of Doordarshan was very unhappy with the name Parvati Khan appearing in the credits. And so he asked, people to change it. Rahi was absolutely furious. He wrote to the President of India, he wrote to the Prime Minister, he wrote to the DG, he wrote to everybody. He said, does anybody have the right to demand this in a secular nation? You know, he was very, very upset about this. So this is again, as I said, Rahi's commitment and Rahi's very strong feelings about this issue of uh, you know the right to your own identity, the right to your own name, in what he always assumed was a secular and democratic nation. So let's move on then to so there are these three aspects, two or three aspects of Rahi that I would like to take up. One is of course the issue of language, bilingualism in Aadha Gaon, or trilingualism, language, script, and its relationship with religion. The second aspect is has more to do with nation, culture, and identity related to language, but the broader issue of culture and national identities, uh, and of course, Indian Islam. And the third part, if time permits, I will say something about his poetry. So, Hindi and Urdu, or Hindi Urdu. Now, as I said, Rahi was unique in the sense that he wrote all his poetry in Urdu and he wrote all his novels in Hindi. When I make this distinction, perhaps I should also add that it may be uh, better if we say that Rahi wrote all his works in the Perso Arabic script, because that's the script that he knew. Uh, he was clear, however, that a script does not make a language. And he was also clear that a script does not have anything to do with religious identity. And the classic example which he always gave was that of Punjabi, which he said was written in three scripts: Gurmukhi, Nagari, and the Perso Arabic. And yet it is only one language. Secondly, he repeatedly highlighted the obvious contradiction of Jayasi's Padmavat not being accepted as a part of Urdu literature, even though it was written in Nastaliq. You know, when these separate genealogies for Hindi and Urdu were created, there was always this, as is very natural, that you want to sort of take it as far back as possible. And interestingly, the Urdu walas, as I like to call them, they naturally sort of included all works that were written in the Perso Arabic script from medieval times. But the one work they left out was Jayasi's Padmavat, even though it was written in the Perso Arabic script. And the reason was very simple, because the language that it uses, uh, you know, did not sound like Urdu. It was obviously Avdi and Braj. Thirdly, following from this, Rahi was very keen that the artificial barriers that had been created between Urdu and Hindi by scholars and writers be dissolved. In his words, Jaisi, Tulsi, and Kabir, along with Mir and Ghalib, constituted the common ancestry of both Hindi and Urdu literatures. Rahi was keen that both Urdu and Hindi literature and language departments actually include texts and authors from across this artificial divide. Mir and Ghalib in Hindi, and Tulsi, Sur, and Jaisi in Urdu. You know, it's very interesting. During his stint at Aligarh Muslim University, he actually taught a course. Of course, he was in the Urdu department. He taught a course in which he included Jaisi, Tulsi, and Kabir, because he said that students of Urdu literature must be familiarized with these ancestors. As he says, मेरे पुरखे हैं ये इनको इनके बारे में जानना बहुत जरूरी है. Literature, he said, was neither Hindu nor Muslim, it was just literature. It could be written in any regional language or dialect. To come to Adha Gaon was originally written in the Perso-Arabic script, but Urdu publishing houses turned it down, presumably because its language just didn't sound like Urdu. It was at the advice of his close friend and collaborator, Professor Kunwarpal Singh, who taught Hindi at Aligarh Muslim University, that the novel was transliterated into the Nagari script and published in 1966 as a Hindi novel, and it became a sensation overnight. The language of the novel or the languages of the novel, I should say, are Bhojpuri, Urdu, and Standard Hindi. When someone called it Bhojpuri Urdu, Urdu scholars derisively wondered what this new creature was. Some scholars use the term Anchalik, that is regional, because of its use of dialect. But this was not necessarily a qualification. In fact, Rahi uses, as I said, three registers: Bhojpuri for the speech of his characters who belong to Ghazipur, High Urdu for urban Muslim characters, particularly those from Aligarh, and a standard Hindi for narration. Abdul Bismillah has made a further distinction by referring to the particular style, he calls it leza, of Bhojpuri as an I dialect, peculiar to the upper class Syed Muslims of Ghazipur. Let me give you uh, an example of this from the text that I am referring to. Abdul Bismillah in his essay एक नया गवाक्ष खोलती राही की भाषा, he says this I dialect, it belongs to a particular group of people who speak that particular kind of language. The neighboring Hindus do not speak this language. And you do not come across this example anywhere in Hindi literature. आधा गांव के एक संवाद के जरिए ये बात स्पष्ट हो जाएगी, एंड दिस इज अ कोटेशन फ्रॉम द टेक्स्ट ऑफ आधा गांव. फफ्फू आदाब, जीती रहो. ए दिया, तू तो नैयर वालन की एक दम में ही भूल गई हो. कहा बताई फफ्फू, कभी उई बीमार है तो कभी ओऊ बीमार है, और फिर मियाँ के पास आवे. एक था चच्चा है, ता सुन रहे ओ बछनिया से बियाह कही रहे हैं. नौज, ई बिदार सटिया गए हैं का. लियो, तू बेचारे अकेले घरवा में का करें. अब बेचारे बुढ़ाए हैं, बदन और दिल दुखत हुई है. हम मजाक ना कर रहे. भाऊज सच्चाई, बियाह हो गवा तब बिरादरी वाले का कही है. This is what Abdul Bismillah calls the I dialect. He says it is a particular kind of Bhojpuri, it is a particular style or lehza in which Bhojpuri is spoken, which is unique to the peculiar to the upper class Sayyid Muslims of Ghazipur. The Hindus of Ghazipur will not speak in this language, neither will the weavers, nor the chamars, nor the julahas, nor the badais. Okay. What about identity, nation, and culture? Both Ada Ghaon and to an extent Topi Shukla raise issues of caste among Muslims, how Muslim society was fashioned after Hindu society, how the ancestors of Muslims in India were Hindus, as Rahi says over and over again, Islam in India does not have Arab roots. It is an Islam which has grown and prospered and evolved within what he calls Hindustan. And Adagaon is a resounding critique of the two nation theory, both at the thematic and at the formal levels. The Shia Sayyid characters of Bengali and their observance of Muharram, their sense of pride and familial honor based on a notion of racial ancestry, the caste prejudices amongst the Muslim community, and the complete meaninglessness of Pakistan for a community that identifies totally with its homeland, uh, that is, with the village, as well as the different linguistic registers that undercut the relationship between Islam, Urdu, and Pakistan, go into creating a novel that is a tour de force in Indian literature. This is a novel which is very different from the blood and gore that characterize so many North Indian narratives of partition. Most of you would be familiar with partition literature, particularly that which has been written in Hindi and Urdu and Punjabi from North India. Uh, Adagaon is very different because its location is different. It is not located in the borderland of Punjab. It is located in the Hindi heartland of UP, and actually it is therefore it has more in common with Kuratil and Haidar's Aap Ka Darya and Abdullah Hussein's Udas Nasle, both novels which are squarely located within, as I said, the Hindi heartland. They are, of course, the differences between these three are also important because with regard to the class affiliations, both Haider and Hussein's novels are more about upper class characters. Rahi's characters are, of course, the Shia Sayyids of village Gangali, but it's a much more its canvas is much wider because it includes the entire village and all the castes and all the characters of different persuasions within this village. I will just refer to a couple of instances from the novel that highlight Rahi's main concern. One is the visit of Aligarh Muslim Student Union, Aligarh Muslim University students to Gagoli. This is remember this is a novel which has been set at the time of partition, just before partition, and this happens at the time when the 1946 elections are to take place. So the Muslim League, these students have come to canvass for the Muslim League, and this is how the conversation goes between these students and one of the characters from the village, Kamruddin, popularly called Kammo. Of course, I will read from the translation by Gillian Wright, and therefore I will not be able to capture the different language registers. The students from Aligarh speak chaste Urdu, and Kammo speaks in Bhojpuri. So you just have to imagine this. Assalamu alaikum. He was startled at this greeting. Two unfamiliar young men in black sherwani coats were standing outside. Walaikum assalam, he returned their greeting. Please come and take a seat. We hail from Aligarh, said one of the young men in the correct Urdu of an educated city dweller. Yes, Sahab. Are there holidays there nowadays? No, there are not, said the second young man. We are not on vacation, but you must have heard that elections are at hand. That I have. Your respected mother and father are also voters. This sentence intoxicated Kammo. For the first time, he had heard his mother called respected mother. Otherwise, she was called neither mother nor wife. She was just Rahman Bo. He smiled. Acha, tell me this. Will Aligarh go to Pakistan or stay here? It is our endeavor that Aligarh be incorporated into Pakistan, as it is a beacon of Islamic culture. Beacon? Repeated Kammo in amazement. Yes, Sahab. I heard there was a university there, and now you're saying there's a beacon? The young men smiled. They said, please try to see. The reality of the situation is, yes, Sahab, listen here. What I say is simply this. If Aligarh is to go to Pakistan, then say straight out. Because if it is, then my respected mother and father cannot give you their votes. I beg your pardon, explained one of the young men. If Pakistan is not created, the 80 million Muslims here will be and made to remain untouchables, said the other. Hey, bhai, it looks to me as if it's been a waste of time educating you. What else? If you people don't even know that Bhangis and Chamars are the untouchables, what sort of Bhangis and Chamars do you think we are? And how can anyone who is not an untouchable be turned into one, Saab? Go on, tell me. I'm listening. One of the young men proceeded to deliver a complete speech which Kammo didn't understand. At least because the young man was talking of matters none of which had any connection with him or Ganguly. I can't believe all that, Saab, said Kammo after listening to the whole speech. Why should this Gaya Ahir, this Chikuria, or this Lakhna Chamar, or this Hariya Badhai become our enemies for no reason after Hindustan gets free? Is that what you people learn over there? At this moment, you may not be able to comprehend this fact, but that is indeed what is going to happen. Cows will be tethered in our mosques. Yes, Sahab. If all Muslims go to Pakistan, what difference does it make if horses are tied in them or cows? It's not as if Hindus are going to say prayers there. It's a fine bit of nonsense that we all go to Pakistan and then expect the Hindus to look after our mosques. At first, the young men tried to persuade the peasant in front of them, but gradually they became very angry. And rightfully so. After all, there is a limit to everything. One of them said very angrily, very well, but don't you complain when the Hindus come and carry off your mothers and sisters. Which Behenchot can carry off my mothers and sisters? Kammo began to tremble with rage. If you people weren't my guests, I won't rest till I torn the legs off you. A chamar was heading towards them, a bottle of kerosene hanging from one end. He stopped when he heard Kammo's voice. Did you hear that? Kammo asked him. What is it, Mia? Asked the chamar. These people have come from Aligarh to tell me that when Hindustan gets free, you people are going to carry off our mothers and sisters. Hare Ram Ram, said the chamar, quite unnerved. You people know reading, writing, and all that. Just ask yourself whether any man can even look at the sisters and mothers of the Mias as long as we are alive. Better than you people is this chamar of ours, said Kammo, who says Ram Ram just at hearing someone talk about carrying off our women folk. I'll end here. It's a longer quotation, but I just wanted to give you a sample of this entire idea of how the very concept of Pakistan is so alien to the people in Bengali. And the second point, as I'm sure you would have noticed, is how this notion of caste is ingrained in them, and yet it's a notion of caste which kind of seems to assume a certain kind of reciprocal relationship which exists between the Shias and the lower caste, the Dalits in this particular case. Now, I'm not sort of trying to argue that there is no exploitation. within this community. But I think Rahi is at pains to tell us that there is a dynamic relationship. There is a relationship of mutual give and take also, which does exist within this same society. With regard to the issue of language, uh, and how is so completely alien to these characters. Uh, there's just a shorter extract. There is a character called Hamad Mia, you know, who you know who's kind of been discriminated against by the other Shias, and he's trying to sort of uh, trying to set himself up as somebody who deserves respect from them. Uh, so he starts, as you know, as a consequence of this desire, he starts to speak in Urdu. Because of this Urdu of his, Hamad was day by day becoming further removed from the people of Dakhin and Uttar Pattis. People there would say, Bhai, if you go out of the village, speak Urdu or English or Persian. What's the point of tampering with the language of your forefathers in your own home? It was during this period too that Hamad Mia had become rich. Instead of one, there were two buffaloes tethered at his door, and there were big hybrid Jamnaparis. So that was the first reason that the Mias were not well disposed to him. In the one day, Rabban Bia actually told him, "Hey Hamad, don't give yourself so many heirs." But Hamad was not prepared at all. He knew that the Sayyids of the village were jealous of him. He even scolded his wife into learning pure town Urdu. Only his mother had refused to give in, and she had since died. His daughter spoke the language of the home, but the moment Hamad stepped inside indoors, they began to speak in rapid Urdu. The harsh tongue sounded extremely ugly and arrogant to them. They were scared to use it to express what lay in their hearts, just as you don't tell a stranger your family secrets. And so, when Hamad Mia was present, no one spoke about family matters at all. In fact, it sounded as if some ladies who were strangers to one another had met by accident and were talking very politely to pass the time. As a result, the homely atmosphere of the house disappeared. His wife would begin to scold in Bhojpuri. I am telling you this, that. Then she would stop and continue in Urdu. Have your brains become defective, young ladies? And then give up. Oh, to hell with this Nikhondi language. She began cursing again in Urdu, and in her anger would fail to administer the scolding, and so it goes on. So the kind of confusion that this creates and the kind of alienation which this family, or at least the ladies in this family, experience when they are forced to speak in Urdu. Uh, on the issue of language, I think a far more evocative example would really be from Topi Shukla. I'm very, very fortunate that Meenakshi is here uh, because there are a couple of instances. I'll quickly go through this because I know I might run short of time eventually, but I cannot resist giving you this example. And I will read from the original. I hope it should be fairly. It's not very difficult for any person who knows Hindustani. इफ़न की दादी किसी मौलवी की बेटी नहीं थी बल्कि एक जमींदार की बेटी थी. दूध घी खाती हुई आई थी, परंतु लखनऊ आकर वह उस दही के लिए तरस गई जो घी पिलाई हुई काली हांडियों में असामियों के यहाँ से आया करता था. बस मायके जाती तो लपड़ शपड़ जी भर के खा लेती. लखनऊ आते ही उन्हें फिर मौलविन बन जाना पड़ता. अपने मियाँ से उन्हें यही तो एक शिकायत थी कि वक्त देखे ना देखे मौका बस मौलवी ही बने रहती थी. ससुराल में उनकी आत्मा सदा बेचैन रही. जब मरने लगी तो बेटे ने पूछा कि लाश करबला जाएगी या नजफ? तो बिगड़ गई। बोली, है बेटा, जाऊं तो तो से हमरी लाश ना संभाली जाए तो हमरे घर भेज दियो। मौत सर पर थी, इसलिए उन्हें यह याद नहीं रहा कि अब घर कहाँ है। घर वाले कराची में है और घर कस्टोडियन का हो चुका है। मरते वक्त किसी को ऐसी छोटी छोटी बातें भला कैसे याद रह सकती हैं? उस वक्त तो मनुष्य अपने सबसे ज्यादा खूबसूरत सपने देखता है। इफ्फन दादी को भी अपना घर याद आया। उस घर का नाम कच्ची हवेली था। कच्ची इसलिए कि वे मिट्टी की बनी थी। उन्हें दशहरी आम का वे बीज पेड़ याद आया जो उन्होंने अपने हाथ से लगाया था और जो उन्हीं की तरह बूढ़ा हो चुका था। ऐसे ही छोटी छोटी और मीठी मीठी बेशुमार चीजें याद आईं। वह इन चीजों को छोड़कर भला करबला या नजफ कैसे जा सकती थी? दैट इज वन। जब जब इफ़न के घर जाता तो उसकी दादी ही के पास बैठने की कोशिश करता। इफ़न की अम्मी और बाजी से वह बातचीत करने की कभी कोशिश ही ना करता। वे दोनों अलबत्ता उसकी बोली पर हंसने के लिए उसे छेड़ती। तोरी अम्मा का कर रही, दादी हमेशा यहीं से बात शुरू करती। पहले तो वह चकरा जाता कि अम्मा क्या होती है। फिर वह समझ गया कि माता जी को कहते हैं। यह शब्द उसे अच्छा लगा, अम्मा। वह शब्द को गुड़ की डली की तरह चुभलाता रहा, अम्मा, अब्बू, बाजी। फिर एक दिन गजब हो गया। डॉक्टर भृगु नारायण शुक्ला नीले तेल वाले के घर में भी 20वीं सदी प्रवेश कर चुकी थी। यानी खाना मेज कुर्सी पर होता था। लगती तो थालियां ही थी परंतु चौके पर नहीं। उस दिन ऐसा हुआ कि बैगन का भुर्ता उसे जरा ज्यादा अच्छा लगा। राम दुलारी खाना परोस रही थी। टोपी ने कहा, अम्मी, जरा बैगन का भुर्ता। अम्मी, मेज पर जितने हाथ थे रुक गए। जितनी आंखें थी वे टोपी के चेहरे पर जम गई। अम्मी, यह मलेच्छ शब्द इस घर में कैसे आया? अम्मी, परंपराओं की दीवार ढोलने लगी। अम्मी, धर्म संकट में पड़ गया। यह लफ्ज तुमने कहाँ सीखा? सुभद्रा देवी ने सवाल किया। प्लीज नोट, ये लफ्ज, लफ्ज इज नॉट हिंदी। ये लफ्ज तुमने कहाँ सीखा? दिस इज सुभद्रा देवी। लफ्ज? टोपी ने आंखें नचाई। लफ्ज का होता है माँ? ये अम्मी ये अम्मी तुमने किसने सिखाया है? दादी गर्जी। ई हम इफ्फन से सीखा है। उसका पूरा नाम क्या है? ई हम ना जानते। ते कौन मियाँ के लड़किया से दोस्ती कर ली है बाइकारे। राम दुलारी की आत्मा गनगना गई। बहू, तुमसे कितनी बार कहूं कि मेरे सामने गवारों की यह जबान ना बोला कर। सुभद्रा देवी राम दुलारी पर बरस पड़ी। लड़ाई का मोर्चा बदल गया। I won't give you any more instances, but this is just one of them where language becomes such an important part of not just the dialogue, but the basic thematics of this novel. Let me now turn briefly to some of Rahi's statements on Indian Islam or Islam in India. And you remember I had mentioned this, that in his PhD thesis was really on the influence of Hindustaniyat or Hindustani Sanskriti on Tilisme or Shubha. He has a long piece on in an essay titled Muharram एक ठेठ Hindustani त्योहार. Muharram, a genuine Hindustani festival, where he points out that festivals are connected to the soul of society and they have a strong social basis. Quote, if this is so, then we have to answer the question why a Hindu majority country celebrates Muharram in the most magnificent manner in the world. Not only this, we have to answer another question, why Hindus are ahead of Muslims in celebrating the Muharram festival. To support his claim, he gives the following evidence in this very same essay. Quote, Till some time back, a Hindu sweetmeat seller, a Hindu halwai in Varanasi, used to distribute all the sweets of his shop in remembrance of Hussein on the ninth day of Muharram. And after Muharram, he used to start his business all over again. In cities, kasbahs, and villages, even today, Hindus make their prayer and offerings to the taziyas. They bow in front of the tazia in adoration, put model taziyas in their houses to fulfill their wishes, distribute sharbat in the name of Hussein, and show their prowess in sword and other such weapons like baneti, bank, or gatka. Even today, they pass their unveiled children under the tazia or duldul. I often think, what is the truth? Pakistan or this Muharram? I have seen Hindu youths mourning during Muharram and using chains and knives to shed their blood. Therefore, I cannot understand the truth of Pakistan. Nobody has an answer to the question, why does a 7-day festival become a 10-day one in India? Indian Muslims added 3 extra days to make it more like Dasera. And because it is the story of a battle, they also found their Mahabharat. All the characters in Mahabharat are present in Karbala. Muharram is both Mahabharat and Ramayana. You know, it's a fascinating essay, and I urge all of you to actually read it in the original. Of course, when this volume on Rai comes out, I intend to include a substantial extract in English. But in the original, it is absolutely fascinating what he says about Muharram, particularly the Muharram in Lucknow. About Tilisme Hoshruba, he says these Dastan goals created cities for their characters based on the cities they lived in. The houses for the characters to live in were designed on their own houses. And he gave them, and the Dastan Go gave them their own language to speak in. This is the reason why we see Mulke Firangi ki Shehzadi, that is the Firangi princess, reading the dohas of Kabir, and Malika Asrar Jadu, who is a character from Tilisme Washruba, expressing her opinions on the poetry of Nasik and Atish. Tilisme Washruba is a dastan of about 16,000 pages. To describe Lucknow in fewer pages would not have been possible. Although it is not a complete dastan, but only a part of 1 lakh page long Dastan-e-Amir Hamza. But hardly any dastan of this size exists in the world, and there is hardly a town in this world that can bear the weight of such a big dastan. Alif Lela cannot compare with it. The biggest dastan in the world was written in the small town of Lucknow, and therefore there must be something special about Lucknow. And then Rahi goes on to quote from Haidar Zaka Darya to buttress his opinion of Lucknow as follows. Here, nobody knows the difference between Hindus and Muslims. Riots don't happen during Muharram. Hindus participate in the Tazia processions and Muslims celebrate Diwali. Such an upside down world. Nawab Bahu Begums visit their sons in Lucknow to celebrate Holi. Rai frequently contributed to various literary journals and magazines like Dharamyug, Ganga, and Sarita during his time in Bombay. In one of these contributions, he directly addresses the Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi issue. This is, of course, of particular relevance to us today. But remember, Rai was writing a lot of these essays, a lot of these journalistic pieces during the 80s when he was living in Bombay, of course. And in one of these, he directly addresses this issue by suggesting that a beautiful park should be created for children at the site of the demolished of the masjid, which is later to be demolished. For this, he got brickbats, predictably from both sides. The hate mail that is so common today. He singles out one particular letter he got from a gentleman called Manmohan Snehi, and he responded to it as follows. This is how it goes. And I'm quoting from the original text. यह खत लिखा है 24 तलैया मोहल्ला झांसी के श्री मनमोहन साहू स्नेही ने, जो बुंदेलखंड नव निर्माण दल के महामंत्री हैं। यह अपने खत के आखिर में लिखते हैं कि हाँ, मेरी भी एक तमन्ना है, काबे के अंदर जाकर ओम नमो शिवाय जपूं और शिव को गंगा जल अर्पित करूं। कुछ याद आता है कि शायद पहली लोकसभा में हिंदू महासभा के एक सदस्य ने कहा था कि काबे का संगे बसवत वास्तव में शिवलिंग है और उसे हिंदुस्तान वापस आ जाना चाहिए। ख्याल आता है कि पंडित नेहरू ने बहुत डांट पिलाई थी, पर मैं पंडित नेहरू नहीं हूं। मैं स्नेही जी से केवल यह पूछना चाहता हूं कि आपकी ये तमन्ना क्यों है? क्या इसलिए कि जहां एक मंदिर था वहां एक मस्जिद बन गई है? यदि ऐसा है तो आप में और बाबर बादशाह में क्या फर्क रह जाएगा? यह प्रश्न मैं इसलिए कर रहा हूं कि स्नेही जी ने यह भी लिखा है, कोट, जहां तक श्री राम जन्मभूमि पर बाबरी मस्जिद का प्रश्न है, गरीब से गरीब और कमजोर से कमजोर भी प्रयत्न करता है कि उसका हक मिल जाए। आक्रांताओं ने संपूर्ण मानवीय संवेदनाओं को बलाए ताक रखकर हिंदुओं की इसकी काल की न केवल संपत्ति वरन हिंदुत्व के को ही मिटाने में कोई कोर कसर नहीं छोड़ी थी। स्नेही जी तो कवि हैं, शायद, तो उन्हें अपने साहित्य और अपनी सभ्यता का इतिहास तो मालूम होना चाहिए। इतिहास गवाह है, एंड तवज्जो चाहता हूं, क्या रसखान का नाम कर कर कृष्ण भक्ति काव्य का इतिहास लिखा जा सकता है? क्या तुलसी के रामायण में आपको कहीं मुगल दरबार की झलकियां नहीं दिखती? क्या आपने अनीस के मरसिए देखे हैं? देखे होंगे तो आपको यह भी मालूम होगा कि इन मरसियों के पात्रों के नाम भले ही अरबी हों, परंतु वह हैं अवध नगरी के राजपूत। क्या आपको गालिब का एक शेर सुनाऊं? जला है जिस्म जहां दिल भी जल गया होगा, रेखते हो जो अब राख जुस्तजू क्या है। यह शेर पढ़कर कौन सी तस्वीर उभरती है? इनफैक्ट recently Javed Akhtar Saab has also mentioned this share of Ghalib in many of his talks, and said that Ghalib could only have been a Hindustani because it is only in amongst the Hindus in Hindustan that you have bodies being cremated. To return to Rahi, क्या आपने नजीर अकबर आबादी की नज्म होली पढ़ी है? क्या आपने गोलकोंडा के कुतुब शाही बादशाहों की मस्जिद देखी है? उसके खंबे कमल के तराशे हुए फूलों पर खड़े हैं और उसकी मेहराबों में आरती के दिए खुदे हुए हैं। क्या आप जानते हैं कि महाकवि अमीर खुसरो की माँ राजपुतानी थी? क्या आपने देखा है कि मुहर्रम पर दशहरी की छाप कितनी गहरी है? आपने बड़े गुलाम अली खां, करीमत अली खां, फैयाज खान, अकबर अली खान, अमजद अली खान, अहमद जान तिरकवा, अल्लाह राखा खान, बिस्मिल्लाह खान, बेगम अख्तर, रसूलन बाई वगैरह के नाम सुने हैं? स्नेही जी, हिंदुत्व को मिटाने में कोर कसर ना छोड़ने की बात ना कीजिए। हिंदुस्तान के मुसलमानों ने हिंदू संस्कृति और सभ्यता को अपने खूने दिल से सींचकर भारतीय संस्कृति और भारतीय सभ्यता बनाने में बड़ा योगदान दिया है। आप जैसों की परेशानी यह है कि आप लोग धर्म की धूल भरी गहरी रंगे वाली ऐनक उतार कर धूप की असली रंग देखने को तैयार ही नहीं है। भूल जाइए कि हिंदुस्तान सिर्फ आप जैसे हिंदुओं का है। हिंदुस्तान मेरा भी है और वह किसी भी तरह आपसे कम मेरा नहीं है। Razi Saab, how much time do I have now?
ऑलमोस्ट खत्म हो रहा है, लेकिन 2-4 मिनट में खत्म
Acha,
नहीं।
let me briefly then run through a little bit about his poetry, Asim Saab, with your permission. Very quickly, then there was an early phase in the 50s where he published collections like Naya Saal, Moje Gul, Moje Sabah, and Rakshe Mai. And his epic verse, of course, 1857 Kranti Katha. Most of these poems were in the progressive tradition, drawing upon the metaphors of revolution and social transformation. But by the 1960s, the tone of his poetry does undergo a shift. He acknowledges that the inspiration for poetry springs from sorrow. He uses the words tanhai and vira, and that was the reason his image was different from other progressive poets. He says during the national movement, the poet's voice had become loud because there was the noise of gunshots all around. Whispered sounds could not be heard, hence, the poet was constrained to speak loudly. Today, it is not necessary. Yesterday belonged to Josh Malihabadi, but today, Firak is the big name. And this is because his lower notes are in tune with the music of today. This new poetry, and he's talking about the Jadid Shairi, Nai Kavita as in Hindi, this is about the relationship between individual and society. It considers life as a unified whole. The individual and society are both partners in life. Today's poet is trying to explore that loneliness and silence that has accompanied industrial progress and tightened its hold on him. Now his voice is not loud because he is not addressing the entire nation. The individual is addressing another individual. Hence, the vocabulary and music of new poetry in Urdu is very different. Uh, you know, there are occasions when Rai's nazms are an anguished cry from the heart, particularly when his identity as a Hindustani was doubted. And I've given you examples from Ganga or Mahadev or Mera Naam Musalman Hai. But generally, he employed new images and symbols or refashioned older ones. New images like the shroud of moonlight, Chandni Kafan Bhi Hai, uh, or the grave like room from which the poet, wrapped in the shroud of a blanket, stares at the world outside. They express the silence and hopelessness of the alienated urban individual. Rai's poetry has a proximity to older Urdu poetry and its idiom. However, this closeness constantly draws our attention to the relevance of tradition in contemporary context. Viraha, the inspiration for his poetic creation, connected him to the older Bhakti traditions. And on another level, it also established his link with modern Urdu poetry. What is also significant is the distinction that he makes between Pakistani Urdu poetry and Indian Urdu poetry. Very interesting. And I'm quoting from him. He says, new poetry of Hindustani Urdu is both doe-eyed, like the deer, and ponderous, heavy-footed, like the female elephant. Its large, surprised eyes look with fear in all directions, but it shoulders the weight of a 5,000-year-old civilization. Hence, it cannot leap and run. Pakistani new poetry does not carry any weight on its shoulders because it does not have its own traditions. It is in search of traditions. Because Pakistan has no history in this contest between Islam and America, Islam is losing and America is winning. And hence, the new poet there is only concerned about shocking the reader. The thing that surprised me and in a sense even gladdened me that Pakistan is feeling the absence of Hindus and Sikhs. Ayub Khan may say whatever, but if a Muslim poet from Lahore can write Kali Puja in 1962, please remember this was prior to the creation of Bangladesh. And if the popular literary monthly Adabe Latif publishes Kabir's, Nanak's, and Mira's poetry in the name of Old Urdu, Kadim Urdu, and calls it its own inheritance, if there is an increase in the number of Hindi Sanskrit words in new literatures there, and if poets are writing duas and using symbols from Hindu mythology, then I must say that Ayub Khan is wrong in believing that the banks of the Ravi and the waters of the Jhelum have forgotten Hindus and Sikhs. Not only can we see the influence of Hindi on the language of these duas, but even their ideology reveals Hindu influence. But what people would call Hindu influence is in fact the influence of Hindustani traditions. Hence, I consider their influence on Pakistani poets not Hindu, but Hindustani influence. Despite religious differences, these Hindu gods and goddesses have dissolved into the spiritual life of Muslims in a way that makes them invisible. And finally, I would like to end, as I began, with a very evocative poem, very relevant for today, for the days that we live in. Uh, in the original, unfortunately, I don't have a translation, uh, but this is how it goes. Its title is छांव बेचने वाले. नारियल के पेड़ों की छांव बेचने वालों, बरगद बरगदों को मत काटो, पीपलों को रहने दो, इमलियों को मत छेड़ो, इनकी पत्ती पत्ती पर धूप पर सुखाती है, इनकी पत्ती पत्ती पर सुबह अपनी उंगली से अपनी राम लिखती है, इनकी डाली डाली पर दिन कयाम करता है, सुबह शाम करती है, चांद के कटोरे में भर के महबो शबनम आईना बनाती है, रात पर चलाती है अपने अक्स का जादू, खुद भी राम होती है, शब को राम करती है, नारियल के पेड़ की छांव बेचने वालों, बरगदों को मत काटो, इस जगह उतरते हैं काफिले बहारों के, इस जमी पे खिलते हैं फूल इंतजारों के, पेड़ खाकसारों के जमी पे मत छीटो बीज इश्तिहारों के, काफिले बहारों के इस जगह पर उतरते हैं. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, Prakash ji. Wonderful. It was really very, what you call, mesmerizing and very informative. Let us hear Professor Asim Siddiqui for the concluding remarks, and after that we will move on to the question answer or comment section. There are many who would like to make comments and ask questions. Asim sir.
Yeah. Good morning and good evening both. I must say it was an extremely wonderful talk. There are different aspects of Rahi's personality. There are different aspects of Rahi's art. And I must say that in just 1 hour, Professor Bodh Prakash covered almost everything. We got an idea about Rahi's poetry, that how Rahi's poetry is in the Urdu tradition. We got an idea about Rahi's novels, especially two of his very important novels, Topi Shukla and Adha Gaon. And of course, there is another very important work, and that was Rahi's PhD thesis, where Rahi worked on Trism Hosh Ruba, and basically he was working on Indian elements, or rather I'll use the word Hindustaniyat, because this word Hindustaniyat is extremely important, and the word Hindustani is also extremely important, because now in fact using the word Hindustani, saying that I speak Hindustani, in fact the moment you say that I speak Hindustani, I am very sure that many people will take offense of the use of this word, right? And I must say that he talked about one very important issue, and that is language in Rahi Masoom Raza. And language here, whether it is Urdu or it is Hindi or it is Urdu Hindi or its relationship to script. And he himself mentioned that there has been a long debate also and a lot of scholarly work also which has been done in this area. I will begin with Professor Meenakshi's remark at the very beginning, and I must say that she made some very perceptive remarks. I'll strongly disagree with her on one thing when she said that it was not her translation, but Rahi's text which got the award. No, ma'am. Your translation did play a very important role, and translator's role can never be undermined. So I disagree there. And of course, Rahi's text is also important, but your translation was extremely important because many very good texts are simply spoiled by bad translation. We know that. Okay. Uh, and about Topi Shukla and Adha Gaon, I must also say I'm reminded of one essay which was written by Ralph Russell. And the essay was How Not to Write a History of Urdu Literature. How not to write a history of Urdu literature. In fact, when I was reading Topi Shukla, at many places I was a bit irritated also. Adha Gaon, first 100 pages, actually it's a struggle to read first 100 pages. But then gradually the novel grows on you. And Topi Shukla, every now and then the narrator is actually entering, talking to you. So, and as was pointed out, that Rahi is very direct. Uh, Meenakshi Shivam made this point that Rahi is always very direct. He's talking to you. So here, those of us actually who have read English novels, those of us who have who are trained into reading English novels, where you have that very strong tradition of omniscient narration, or even when the narrator is present in the novels, then the presence is actually not so prominent. So those who have read English novels or those who are familiar with English tradition of reading novels, they may find certain aspects of Rahi's novels probably a bit unnerving. So that means this also begs the question that when we are reading Hindi novels or when we are reading Urdu novels, we must remember that we are reading novels from a different tradition. We are reading Urdu novels and we are reading Hindi novels. This fact actually needs to be emphasized. Then another very perceptive remark actually, ma'am, that you made at the very beginning, how would he write today? Because if we see today's context, social media, and of course, many irresponsible remarks also, when the difference of Akbar and Aurangzeb is completely blurred. So obviously, this whole idea of composite culture, which is an article of faith for Rahi, and in fact, I must say that this idea of composite culture actually needs to be revived, it needs to be emphasized, it needs to be talked about because it is uh, not only our heritage, it is also something actually which should live. And it is a good idea. But the very idea of composite culture actually has taken a very strong beating because when there is no difference between Akbar and Aurangzeb, so what can we say about script, language, these questions? And I'll give you one example. When you read Rahi's Adha Gaon and Professor Bodh Prakash excellently drew our attention to different discourses in that novel. There is that discourse, for example, which is coming from Aligarh student, that pure Urdu. And of course, there is also that language, Bhojpuri language. And Rahi uses the word Bhojpuri Urdu, and very interesting word. And of course, the narration, the Hindi, which is used in the narration. So there, if I read this novel, and I feel that at many places there are so many Urdu words which are used by Rahi Masoom Raza. Today, in fact, there is a whole lobby which tries to emphasize this point that Urdu and Hindi are two entirely separate languages. And it's a very strong lobby actually, which talks about this, that Urdu and Hindi are two very different languages, and there are hardly few words or few hundred words which are common. Now, when you and there is a problem of a different nature also. When you read those Urdu words, and I know that lots of Hindi speakers who have no idea of Urdu, but they love Urdu language, they read Urdu language, they in fact love to recite Urdu couplets, and they are very eager to read. They are greatly interested in reading Urdu literature, but there is also a particular politics of publishing. When you see, for example, when I recite a couplet in Urdu, obviously the proper pronunciation of Urdu is important there, right? But publishers have made it impossible for anyone not familiar with Urdu to pronounce those words correctly. And the reason is, मालवीय जी का बहुत पुराना रिमार्क है, हिंदी में बिंदी क्यों, हिंदी में बिंदी क्यों. Now I don't see any newspapers, any magazines, any books, any publishers using bindi. Now this is actually very unnerving, because if you remove bindi, I want to read something correctly, but I am not able to read correctly. So when Rahi uses those Urdu words and that bindi is used, nukta is used, obviously it makes the job of a reader very easy. And that way actually, if you Bodh Prakash ji, वो दस्तावेज जो सीरीज है मंटो की, राजकमल ने छापी, उसमें उन्होंने नुक्ता लगाया है और सबके लिए पढ़ना बहुत आसान हो गया. तो दैट मीन्स, अच्छा यहाँ पर एक और इशू भी है. देयर इज अनदर इशू आल्सो. If you go to the website of say Hindi Directorate, Central Hindi Directorate, they issued a booklet, and in that booklet they also talked about a kind of composite culture, and how, for example, Hindi also uses words from other languages, and there those words can be put simply by using a nukta. That means there are some sounds, fa sound, kaf sound, ka sound, all these sounds, and that way actually Devanagari has great adaptability. Devanagari has great adaptability, and Rahi, when Rahi was the champion of Devanagari, there was a reason. In fact, even for Urdu speakers, the difference between say and seen when they are speaking, it's not there. So, but seen and sheen, that difference is there. So when Government of India's website itself states that this nukta can be used, but publishers, newspapers, they all have their own politics. And that way, actually, this difference is widened. And I must say that very important issues were raised. I'll also just make one more point. Bodh Prakash ji talked about that entire discourse about Pakistan, how it finds place in Rahi's novel. And many characters actually in Adha Gaon, especially those who are from Gangoli, they have absolutely no idea what is Pakistan. And they have absolutely no idea. And I was also reminded of Manto's story, Toba Singh, where those inmates actually have no idea about Pakistan. So that means here he is making another kind of a statement. There is Pakistan movement, and of course that movement was also confined to elites. But at the ground level, it people hardly know about it, or they are not clear about it. And again, I am telling you from my own experience, if you go to any slum in any area in your city, slums, people who are living in slums, in huts, or they don't have any roofs on their heads, they are living their life on an everyday basis. They have no idea of yesterday, they have no idea of tomorrow. And I am absolutely sure that they won't be able to tell you that India was ruled by Britain for 200 years. They have absolutely no idea of history. So that means history is absolutely irrelevant for, say, a very big number of people. But history The way actually it comes, it is made relevant. So that way, Rahi's work actually is a kind of pointer also to many dangers actually we are facing. And I wish I had more time, but I can just congratulate Professor Bodh Prakash for making an excellent presentation. And this just few days ago, Muzaffar Ali Sahab was here in Aligarh, and he never tired of talking about Rahi Masoom Raza. And from Muzaffar Ali's talk, I learned that Rahi Sahab was a big star in Aligarh, and he had great influence on all those people, Muzaffar Ali included, Shahriyar included, all those people. Aligarh had a very big circle at that time of people who are interested in literature. Jazvi Sahab, Shahriyar Sahab, and then Rahi Sahab himself, Javed Kamal. So there, from Muzaffar Ali's words, actually, I learned something more about Rahi. I must congratulate Razi Bhai also. And as I said, that a lot can be said, but I will confine to my 10 minutes. Thank you.
बार आइए, lot can be said. So thank you very much for all these.
Razi sir, may I just add one couple of things to what Azim Saab has just said. The issue of, may I?
नहीं, मैंने कहा क्वेश्चन आंसर में चलते हैं तो वही बात का होता है, या अभी करना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, I just wanted to say something in the
Okay, sure,
context of
sure.
what Azim
Sure.
Saab had said. This issue of script that Rai talks about, Rai was very practical about certain matters. He said that, look, the Perso-Arabic script, people are not familiar with it. And if you transcribe Urdu literature into the Nagari script, it will simply aid and help in popularizing that literature. Many more readers will come into the fold. So it is not, it was simply a practical thing that he was not against, the script by itself. The second thing which you mentioned about Adha Gaon, there is a sequence in this text where the villagers ask these students, will Aligarh be a part of Pakistan? So they say, well, they kind of think and they say, well, we are trying. Then they say, will Bengali be a part of Pakistan? He says, no, there is no question of Bengali being a part of Pakistan. He says, then please excuse me. How can I have anything to do with what you are saying? If Bengali cannot be a part of Pakistan, then thank you very much. आप जाइए अपना काम कीजिए. So sorry, I just wanted to sort of
All
add
right.
to that. Thank you.
So let's move to question answer session. But before that, just an announcement for the coming Saturday. Rafat, just show the poster, please. Well, it's a very different topic coming Saturday. A very sensitive topic: Muslim women and personal law in India today. And the speaker is an internationally known expert on the Indian Muslims issues, especially on the kinship and social organization, on the Muslim personal law. And she will be helped, for the introductory remarks by Dr. Asia Alam from University of Louisiana, and Professor Huma Ahmed Ghosh from Department of San Diego University. Sorry, couldn't read. So thank you all, and stay tuned for this coming Saturday. And I over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for moderating the question answer session. We don't have much time, 20 minutes, I guess, because at 1, Rafat will become very restless. So it is up to him. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Razi Bhai. Okay, so the question and answer session is open now. Before we begin the session, I would like to thank Professor Bodh Prakash ji and Dr. Meenakshi Shivram and Professor Asim Siddiqui, our regular speaker. So thank you all, and it was a wonderful session, and of course it was of interest for me because of being at Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza Saab. So those who know how to ask the question, so please raise your digital hand, or you can put your interest in the chat box. So right now I don't see anything in chat box, but Razak Khan Saab raised the hand, and after that Aisha Munira Rashid. Go ahead, Razak Saab.
Uh, Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Prakash, for a wonderful talk. Your talk made me speculate about two aspects, and I'd love to hear your responses on that. The first I thought, which was interesting, is to not think of Rahi Masoom Raza through the genre of writing. So you mentioned the literature, novel, prose, and the poetic differentiation of Hindi and Urdu. But I was wondering if you would also be open to including his television writing as not just something he did commercially, but that is also should be read in his literary form. So I'm thinking here of also, apart from Mahabharat, I'm thinking of Neem Ka Ped, which has a very interesting language politics of its own, particularly because it also brings the caste politics beyond the Muslim or Sayyids language dynamic. So that's one. How do scholars of literature engage with television or film writing? Something that also I think informs the writing of Manto, for example. So that's a question for literary scholars if we might be able to open up to television and film writing. A very brief question also in terms of thinking about this not just as a Hindi Urdu question, but also a question about vernacularity within those languages. So what Masoom Raza often was blamed for too many abusive word or galis in his writing. And he, I think, famously said, if people will stop speaking like this, I'll stop writing like that. But which is the idea of the vernacular itself, the Ghazipur area dialect. So just to be brief, I wonder if we can also talk about this beyond the Hindi Urdu to a question of classicization, middle class language politics versus, let's say, a more rooted language politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Sure.
Khan.
May I respond?
Please go ahead.
Okay, right. So thank you for your questions. As far as Rahi's work in cinema and television is concerned, I didn't actually get time to talk about it. But there is a pretty long work, Cinema or Sanskriti, where he talks, where he has written exclusively on this issue of the language of cinema. In fact, it would be of interest to all of you, particularly those who were associated with Aligarh, that he left Aligarh a very bitter man in the 60s, because it was his very ardent desire to be a teacher. He didn't want to be in films. It's just that he never got that job, and therefore he was forced to go to Bombay. But his love for literature remained, his love for Aligarh remained. And just before he passed away, I think it was in 1990 or 1991, he was invited to Aligarh Muslim University to deliver a lecture. And in that lecture, he begins by saying that now that wrong which was done to me has finally been righted. And I'm very, very happy and pleased to be here and talking to all of you here. In that lecture, he has he has given a very fine critique of what cinema is and how it should be studied. So one of the things that he says in that essay, and this one of the things that he says very interesting. He says that that cinema should be treated like any other literary form, just as drama or poetry or novels have their own parameters through which we judge them, through which we evaluate them. Cinema too is a literary form. It has its own language, it has its own structure, it has its own idiom, and we must develop this critical theoretical paradigm within which we can evaluate cinema. Rahi was very, very concerned about how so much bad cinema is popular cinema. You know, and you know, somewhere he was very conscious of the fact that he was a part of this Hindi film industry which churned out third-rate cinema. You know, in one very interesting letter which he writes to the Prime Minister at that time, Rajiv Gandhi, he says, you know, you are the Amitabh Bachchan of politics. But you know, I am just a script writer, and I write. There are three kinds of films. There are good films, and there are bad films, and there are very bad films. And I write scripts for all three kinds of films. So he was very conscious of the fact that he was participating in this world of commercial cinema. But one of the things that he says in this essay is that we must include cinema studies as a part of the curriculum in literature departments. Azim Saab, I don't know if you are if you know this. You know,
Sir,
in the late
I
80s,
am teaching a course on film studies.
Yeah,
precisely,
that's what I
precisely.
was about to ask.
But he was arguing this position in the late 80s at a time when the whole idea of literary studies was in its infancy. You know, we were moving away. You know, remember in the last talk we said that away from the Anglo-American canon into a more broader notion of what literature is and what it should include. So Rahi was talking about film studies at a time when, you know, literature departments had not even woken up. So it's very interesting what he says about cinema studies. The So to come back to the question, I think Rahi's contribution, he himself says it at some point, where he says that, you know, I know that I am doing this work. He says I'm doing this work because, you know, I have to earn a living. How do I survive? I need money to survive, and this is something that I do in order to earn a little bit of money. But his heart was always in Aligarh and in literature and in poetry and in his creative work. By the way, he wrote most of his novels after Aadha Gaon in Bombay. Aadha Gaon was produced in 1966, so the rest of the novels were all written
both
and published when
Thank
during
you,
his stint
Professor.
in Bombay.
आप
Thank you,
लोग brief
Professor.
आप लोग brief जवाब दें, time ज़्यादा
He-
नहीं और brief
Yeah,
Actually,
I was about.
can I
Asim
just
bhai,
add one
जी
point?
जी
Just one
you
thing.
wanted to add
Rahi,
this?
Rahi called Aligarh one of his mothers, right? Talks about three mothers. One is his biological mother, and one is Gangoli, and the third is Aligarh.
जी
Thank
Aisha,
you.
Professor.
So
Okay.
in any case, I agree entirely that you know, now that we have this discipline of cinema studies, Rai's contribution to cinema and television should also be analyzed within that discipline and within that critical framework. The
Absolutely.
second
Thank you.
question
Yeah.
related to
Sir,
language
let's
and
go to other questions. Let's go to other questions. We don't really have time. There are many other.
Yeah, please. We are running. Aisha Munira Rashid, please.
So
sorry,
I have to ask to all the three experts, may I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
yeah, of course.
Yes. There was this question related to Urdu and Hindi divide that was raised and that was discussed well. So I think that both the languages share the same syntax, and when it comes to lexical items, the vocabulary, Urdu heavily borrows from Persian as well as Arabic. There, the difference is, I mean, only in vocabulary, the difference becomes vast because of the fact that Hindi derives from Sanskrit and Urdu derives words from Persian and Arabic. But syntax is the same, and so far as academic sociolect to which Professor Prakash referred is concerned, we know that Hindi and Urdu both are syntactically almost the same. We have the same gender. There's one question that particularly intrigued me, caught my attention. That was Professor Asim Siddiqui used a sentence, perhaps it was ascribed to Malvia. Uh, mm, mm, Hindi
Hindi
में
में
बिंदी
बिंदी।
क्यों?
Yeah, so that is a very important observation that some people would like to pronounce Urdu words correctly. For them, it would be hugely unjust not to have bindi or some kind of uh, indicators that would tell whether it's za or ja. There can be a big difference in the meaning of words. There's a huge difference between Zalil and Jalil. We know that. So it's very important to have the bindi or many other um, lexical, I don't know, phonetic markers. At the same time, I believe I have a question
Yeah,
that I'm
but
directing to you, sir. Why not in Urdu also we have the same kind of system? For example, Ra sound, many Urdu speakers can pronounce, articulate Ra, but we don't know whether it's Na or Ra. Likewise, Sha, Prakash. So that consonant cluster pra, we can pronounce it, but we don't know whether or not it's Parkash or Prakash. So in Urdu also, there could be some kind of phonetic, I don't know, Arab, some kind of vowel mark, which could tell Urdu readers to how to improve their pronunciation of Hindi. Because I
so,
remember,
so Rashid,
yeah,
what is your
that's
question?
my question. Yeah, this is my question: that could we not introduce this kind of system even in Urdu, the way we have that system, which is definitely very important and which is not being practiced as a matter of
Thank you.
what to say, which is
So,
unfortunate. In
I
Urdu also, we can have the same system or not.
thank you. I would
अच्छा
like
वैसे
Asim sir
फिर बट
to add.
पुट का भी हो जाएगा, फिर अंग्रेजी भी जोड़ देते हैं, बट पुट भी हो जाएगा उसमें.
Yeah, but very
जरा
good.
रफा साहब का एक रिक्वेस्ट सुन लीजिए आप लोग रियली बिकॉज you will lose the questions if the time is too short now. If the
So,
questions come as 5 minutes speeches, that is not going to happen.
yeah.
Really.
So we are all aware of all those issues. Asim sir, do you wanted to say a brief response to her question?
Just yes, sir. Yes, very brief response. You see, every language has its distinctive character. Also, I mean that can be said about English also. Say there are many sounds actually, and that way actually Hindi is very systematic or scientific. What is written, that is pronounced, and it is pronounced actually that way. But Aisha already answered this,
Thank you.
and
So
Devanagari had that great adaptability. Yeah.
thank you. So there are a couple of family members from Dr. Rahi Masoom Raza are attending the session. So like Ashraf Bhai, Simi Qadri, Mariam, anyone want to say something? Please go ahead and mute yourself. Sorry to put you on the spot. Simi, or then I will come back to the Abdullah Bhai, Dr. Abdullah.
So, Adab, everybody, this is Mariam.
Yeah.
I just thank you all, Professor Bodh, Prakash ji, Meenakshi ji, Asim Saab. Thank you so much. And of course, to your committee as well for putting this together. This was a really great presentation that brought out a lot of different dimensions of my father. There was one, I think, Meenakshi ji, aapne, in your introductory remarks, perhaps you had mentioned about how you think, what kind of a writer he might have been today. And, you know, I often give this a lot of thought, especially as I see how India has evolved in the past few decades. And there was also a question of whether he would have the courage to write what he wrote in, you know, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And my answer to that is absolutely. So there's one thing about him is that he was never afraid to speak up, whatever the consequences were. And he did face a lot of consequences for that. You know, case in point, what happened in Aligarh was one of that. The fact that he was denied, you know, his position there. But again, I just really wanted to thank you all for putting this together.
Thank you, Mariam. Ashraf Bhai is gone. Otherwise, I would have put on him a spot. Simi, do you want to say something? Otherwise, move on. Simi. Okay, Abdullah Bhai, I ask her to unmute, sorry. Abdullah Bhai, please.
I'm unmuted, but my video is not working, I guess. Anyway, thank you. I mean, I don't want to. This is not a question. I just want to make a comment. I had a very long association with Rai Saab since my student days in Aligarh, since 1960s, mid 60s, and I was fortunate to sit with him in the cafeteria and listen to his, surrounded by all his admirers. And he was perhaps the second most popular person after Majaz in Aligarh's romantic and literary circles ever. And two things I want to say, language and all that was, I think one thing it was mentioned that it was Bhojpuri, but I think it is Purvi, to the best of my, understanding. The language of Adha Gaon is Purvi, which is spoken in Ghazipur and Azamgarh area. I belong to the same area. Bhojpuri moves to Banaras and onward to Bihar. Anyway, but that's the distinction. I may be wrong. Last thing I want to say, that very good comment was made by Sardar Jafri when Raisa passed away, on a comment or BBC, that the script of Mahabharat, Rahi wrote it so well because he belonged to a Shia family and his training was in Urdu. So these two influences actually created Mahabharat because there was some similarity in that. And thank you. I don't have a question because time is.
Thank you, Abdullah Bhai. Let's hear some other perspective. Aditya Mukherjee Saab, only few minutes left, but sorry to put you on the spot, but if you want to say something, I know I am only asking the big people, but Aditya Mukherjee Saab.
He corrected my first poem also when I started writing poetry. So he was my first.
Aditya ji, I don't know whether
he's there now. Okay.
Yeah.
Ji.
No,
sorry, Aditya Saab, to put you on the spot.
This was a wonderful experience. I do not want to take any time in this. There are many better experts and such lovely questions. I would leave the time for them. But thank you very much for organizing this. We have been great admirers of both Munish Saab and Rahi Saab. Munish Saab was our colleague for decades. So we have been admirers of the family, and this was a wonderful experience. Thank you so much for organizing it.
Thank you. One question from Sharmila Saiba, that how did he feel about the partition?
I have reading the chat box which says I read stories by Premchand.
I know.
How did he feel about the partition? Is the question related to Premchand or to Rai?
Yeah, I was also confused, but I am giving the benefit of doubt that.
Well, Rai's sorry.
To Rai.
To Rai, of course. That's what I expect.
So Rai's approach to partition I thought was fairly obvious in what I had said. He was clearly against the whole idea. I mean, he thought it was the most illogical thing that could have happened. And all his writings basically oppose this idea. No, absolutely. Very emphatically,
Okay. So I don't. Razi Bhai, Ishrat Saab is not there. I would have. Otherwise, you have someone in mind. Otherwise, I don't see it.
I would like to make a comment.
Okay, Amir.
If I may, just a comment. I want to thank all three speakers, especially Professor Prakash. When I started watching this program, I knew very little, if anything, about Masoom Raza Rahi, although I have spent most of my education at Aligarh. But I feel that I have learned a lot, and especially I want to congratulate Professor Prakash, because you are a gifted teacher, and I think the students who you teach are really lucky, because your presentation was smoothless and it progressed in an interesting way. I never lost interest in your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Amir bhai. Okay, Razi bhai, back to you. If you wanted to call someone, fine. Otherwise, your last comment.
Well, I don't have any question to ask because there are so many nice comments and questions came. I will rather invite Shahid Siddiqui
Oh yeah, I heard
to
something.
have a very brief, very briefly make a comment or ask a question. Don't go.
बहुत शुक्रिया,
बहुत
शुक्रिया।
बहुत ब्रीफ रहिए।
जी जी, बहुत शुक्रिया। सबसे पहले तो मैं मुबारकबाद दूंगा मीनाक्षी जी को इंट्रोड्यूस करने में, और बोध प्रकाश जी को इतना तफसील से सब बातें बताने में, और आसिम सिद्दीकी साहब का जबान की नुक्ताचीनी पे। मैं समझता हूं कि ये बहुत ही अच्छा प्रोग्राम है और बहुत मकबूल रहा, तो इसका एक और हिस्सा होना चाहिए। बड़ी तशनगी रह गई। अब असली चीज़ ये है कि ज़बान के बारे में मैं हल्की सी बात कहना चाहता हूँ कि ज़बान एक बहता दरिया है, वो हमेशा बदलता रहता है। और राही साहब की ज़बान हो या आज के प्रोफेसर्स की ज़बान हो, नुक्ता लगाना हो या नुक्ता ना लगाना हो, नागरी में लिखा जाए या अरबी रस्म ख़त में लिखा जाए, असल में ज़बान बदलती रहती है। और वो बदलती है, जैसा आसिम सिद्दीकी साहब ने कहा कि बहुत से लोग हैं जो तारीख से वाकिफ़ नहीं हैं, मुस्तकबिल से वाकिफ़ नहीं है, और ज़बान उनकी वजह से आगे बढ़ रही है। वही फ़िल्में देखते हैं, वही ज़बान को आगे बढ़ाते हैं। और जो हमारे अपने तबके, जिसे हम एलीट कहते हैं, वो अपने अपने दायरे में काम करते हैं, लेकिन वो ज़बान में बहुत कम शामिल होते हैं। तो असली चीज़ ये है कि जो अवाम की ज़बान है वही आगे बढ़ती है, और वही फ़िल्मों में आती है, वही अदब में आ जाती है, और वही मकबूल होती है। और ये ज़बान का खासा है। आज हम शेक्सपियर की इंग्लिश नहीं बोलते, आज हम गे के मतलब कुछ और समझ रहे हैं, वगैरह वगैरह। तो ये ज़बान की खूबी है। और मैं समझता हूँ राही मासूम रज़ा का ये बहुत खास कंट्रीब्यूशन था कि उन्होंने मुस्तकबिल की तरफ देखा और उसके बारे में कहा और लिखा, और आज के पार्टिसिपेंट्स ने उसको बहुत खूबसूरती से पेश किया। मैं उन सब के लिए मशकूर हूँ। बहुत शुक्रिया। आदाब।
बहुत शुक्रिया।
I think this is good enough. I believe we can always invite them back if really there is something left to say. But Prakash ji, आप वापस आइए वाशिंगटन में. I mean, he was right here 40 miles from my place. We invite.
भाई दूसरा तरीका ये है कि इसका वीडियो तो होगा, इसको बार बार देख लेंगे।
ना वो देख लेंगे. ये यही